Cole Mercer had been without water for 36 hours when he found the spring. It lay at the bottom of a black rock canyon in southern New Mexico, hidden beneath cottonwoods that should not have been alive. He dropped from the saddle, fell to his knees, and drank until the pain in his throat disappeared. Then he made the mistake that changed everything. He stepped into the water. When Cole looked up, 12 Apache riders stood above him on the rocks, every arrow pointed at his chest. Their leader studied the soaked cowboy, then said in calm Spanish, "You crossed the water vow." Cole raised both hands. "I crossed nothing. I was dying." The old man's expression did not change. "For 63 years, no outsider has entered this spring. The first man who did would be taken before the council and offered to my daughter." A young woman pushed through the riders, a rifle in one hand and fury in her eyes. She looked at Cole as if the desert had dragged garbage into her home. That man? Cole had come west looking for work. Instead, one drink of water had made him part of a promise he did not understand, and the only man standing between a hidden canyon and the gang coming to burn it out. 3 days earlier, Cole had been riding toward the mining camps near Silver City with one horse, $11, and a letter promising work that might no longer exist. He was 27, a Mustang breaker by trade, and better with frightened animals than he was with people. That had been useful after his father died. Less useful after the ranch was sold to cover debts Cole had never known existed, so he rode south with no family behind him and no certainty ahead. By the second day, a dust storm erased the trail. By the third, his map had become a cruel joke. The ink showed a wagon road, the land showed cliffs, thornbrush, and miles of sunstruck stone. His gelding, Bramble, began stumbling before noon. Cole poured the last mouthful from his canteen into his hat and let the horse drink it. "Now we are both fools," he whispered. Near sunset, Bramble lifted his head, his ears turned toward a narrow break in the rocks. Cole saw no water, but the horse smelled something. He let Bramble choose the path. The canyon tightened until the walls blocked the sun. Then green leaves appeared between the stones, cottonwoods, ferns, a line of damp earth, and finally a spring clear enough to reflect the sky. Cole checked the banks. No campfire smoke. No hoof prints he could read. No painted markers. No fence, only water. He drank first. Then Bramble drank. Then Cole pulled off his boots and stepped into the spring fully dressed, letting the cold water close around his ribs. For 1 minute, the desert released him. He floated beneath the cottonwood branches, eyes shut, dust lifting from his clothes in pale clouds. That was when the bows came up. The riders had been hidden so perfectly that Cole first mistook them for shadows. The oldest man wore no war paint and needed none. Authority sat on him more heavily than any uniform. "Out of the water," he said. Cole obeyed. The young woman with the rifle never lowered it. Her dark braid was tied with red cloth. A pale scar crossed one eyebrow. She wore a riding skirt over leggings, worn moccasins, and the expression of someone who had learned not to waste warnings. The old man circled Cole once. "My name is Haskell," he said. "I speak for the people of White Flint Canyon." Cole swallowed. "Cole Mercer. I speak for nobody." One rider almost smiled. Haskell pointed at the spring. "This water is protected by a vow made when my grandfather was a boy. No outsider enters it. No one. I did not see a sign. You would not have read it if there were one." That was true, and Cole knew it. He glanced toward his horse. "I apologize. Let me leave." The young woman finally spoke. "You think apology removes your footprints?" Her voice was low, controlled, and far more dangerous than shouting. Haskell looked at her. "Mara." Then he turned back to Cole. "The vow says the first outsider who enters the spring during a season of danger must be brought before the council. If he is judged worthy, he may stand beside my daughter as protector of the water." Cole blinked. "Stand beside her how?" Mara answered before her father could. "As a husband." Cole stared at her. She stared back. Neither looked pleased. "I am sure she is a fine woman," Cole said carefully, "but I was headed to Silver City, and I was hoping to marry a man who knew where he was," Mara said. A few riders laughed under their breath. Haskell lifted one hand. Silence returned. "The vow does not force a marriage," he said. "It forces a choice. Yours, hers, and ours. Until the council speaks, you come with us." Cole looked at 12 bows, one rifle, and a horse too exhausted to run. "Then I suppose I am visiting." The village could not be seen until they were inside it. White Flint Canyon opened behind 2 leaning walls of basalt into a wide hidden basin. Adobe homes and hide shelters stood beneath cottonwoods. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children carried water in clay jars. Horses grazed behind woven brush fences, not ordinary horses. Even in the fading light, Cole saw broad chests, clean legs, deep lungs, and the alert stillness of animals bred for hard country. There were more than 40. A gray mare watched him enter, then looked past him toward the canyon mouth as if counting every rider. Cole had spent half his life around horses. These were exceptional. The people stopped what they were doing. Word traveled before Haskell spoke. The spring took a stranger. Faces turned toward Cole, some curious, some amused, some afraid. Mara dismounted and walked away without looking back. Haskell led Cole to a small adobe room near the central fire. "You will eat here. You will sleep here. You will not leave the canyon without permission." Cole looked toward the corrals. "Why are your horses being kept so close?" Haskell's eyes narrowed. "You noticed. Half the mares are saddled. The night rope is doubled. 3 men on the north rim are watching the same trail." Haskell held his gaze for a moment. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow you will hear what has found us." Cole slept badly. The room was cool, but his mind kept returning to the spring, the drawn bows, and Mara's face when the word husband was spoken. Near midnight he heard hooves, not many, 2 horses coming fast. Cole stepped outside as riders entered the village. One man had blood down his sleeve. The other carried an empty saddle. Mara reached them first. "Where is Tolan?" The wounded rider looked at the ground. "They took him." Every conversation stopped. Haskell came from his house. "Who?" "Vane's men. 6, maybe 7. They were waiting near the north cut. They took Tolan and 3 mares." Mara's jaw tightened. Cole saw fear move through the village, quiet and practiced. This had happened before. The wounded rider added, "They said Silas Vane will return for the rest. He wants the spring too." That changed the room inside Cole's mind. Horse thieves wanted horses. Men who wanted water wanted land, and men who wanted both did not leave witnesses. At dawn the council met beneath a cottonwood whose roots had split a stone platform. 5 elders sat with Haskell. Mara stood beside them. Around the circle the village gathered in silence. Cole was brought to the center. The oldest woman, Yana, looked at him for a long time. "You entered the spring without permission." "Yes, you gave your last water to your horse." Cole glanced toward Haskell. "I did not know anyone saw that." "The canyon sees before the village does," Yana said. "Why did you do it?" "Because he carried me farther than he should have." "Would you do the same for people you do not know?" Cole considered the question. "I do not know." Mara folded her arms. "At least he can admit it." Haskell rose. Then he told Cole about Silas Vane. Vane ran a gang from an abandoned stage station 2 days north. He stole horses, altered brands, and sold them to contractors supplying cavalry posts and mining companies. He had already raided 2 small settlements. White Flint had stopped his first attempt. That made the canyon valuable. It also made the people inside it enemies he intended to erase. 3 mares were taken last night, Haskell said. Tolan was taken alive because Vane wants the northern trail and the location of our second water store. Cole looked toward the corrals. "How many men does Vane have?" 18 that we know. "How many rifles?" "More than we do." "How soon will he come?" Mara answered. "Before the next moon, maybe sooner." Cole slowly understood why the old vow had suddenly become urgent. They did not need a ceremonial husband. They needed someone who could enter a town without being stopped, read brands, understand horse markets, and move through the white settlements where Vane sold stolen stock. Mara saw the realization on his face. "Now you think this was arranged." "I think your father saw a useful cowboy walk into sacred water." Haskell did not deny it. "The vow brought you before us. What we ask now is separate. And what do you ask?" "Help us find Tolan. Learn when Vane will strike. Help us move the herd if we must." Cole looked around the circle. He saw children who had watched armed riders return without one of their own. He saw warriors who knew courage would not manufacture ammunition. He saw Mara, angry not because she feared work, but because every path available to her had been chosen by danger. "I will help for 7 days," Cole said. "No marriage promise, no claim over your daughter. After 7 days we choose again." Mara stepped into the circle, and I ride with him. Haskell's face hardened. "No. You need someone who knows the canyon trails. He needs someone who knows when he is being lied to." Cole almost smiled. "She has a point." Mara turned on him. "I did not ask for agreement. The council accepted." By noon, Cole and Mara were riding north. The first hours were nearly silent. Mara led through dry washes and narrow cuts that did not appear on Cole's map. She rode the gray mare he had noticed the night before. "What is her name?" he asked. "Rain." "Does it rain often enough here to name a horse after it?" "No. That is why the name matters." Cole nodded. That answer told him more about Mara than a long conversation would have. Near dusk, they found the place where Tolan had been taken. Cole dismounted and studied the ground. 7 horses had waited behind scrub oak. One had a chipped left shoe, another dragged the toe of its right hind hoof. A rider had smoked cheap black tobacco and crushed the ash beneath his heel. Mara watched him work. You read tracks quickly. I read horses. Men are usually attached. He followed the marks to a ridge where the trail split. One branch went north, the other curved west toward open country. Mara pointed north, stage station. Cole shook his head. Too obvious. He knelt near a patch of hard ground and found a faint crescent cut into the dust. The chipped shoe went west, so did the horse carrying extra weight. Tolan, probably. Mara looked at him differently, not warmly, but with attention. They rode west until the light failed. At a dry arroyo, they found a strip of Tolan's shirt tied to a mesquite thorn. Then another. He had been leaving a trail. By midnight, they saw firelight below a ridge. 4 men camped beside a line shack. 3 stolen mares were tied nearby. Tolan sat against a post with his wrists bound. Mara reached for her rifle. Cole caught the barrel before she raised it. 4 men, open ground. 1 shot brings the rest of Vane's gang. Then what? Cole looked at the horses. We asked them to help. The stolen mares knew rain. When Mara led the gray mare downwind, the 3 captives lifted their heads. Cole crawled behind the line shack and cut Tolan's ropes. Then he loosened the thieves' saddle cinches and tied a rawhide strip from the cookpot to the tail of the chipped shoe gelding. Mara gave one low whistle. Rain answered. The stolen mares surged toward her. The thieves woke to snapping ropes, falling saddles, and a terrified gelding dragging an iron pot through the fire. Cole pulled Tolan onto bramble. Mara turned Rain into the dark. They escaped without firing a shot. By sunrise, the gang was miles behind them. Tolan was bruised but alive, and he carried news worse than the missing horses. Vane had learned about the spring from a trader who once delivered flour to White Flint. He planned to attack in 4 days, not to raid, to empty the canyon. He had barrels of coal oil. He meant to fire the homes, drive the people out, and claim the water as a supply point for the new freight road. Back in the village, joy at Tolan's return lasted less than an hour. Then fear took its place. 4 days, 18 armed men. A hidden canyon that could become a trap the moment fire reached the cottonwoods. Haskell wanted to move the children and elderly south. Mara wanted every rifle on the rim. The elders argued for protecting the spring. Cole listened until the same problem became clear. They were planning to defend 3 things at once. People, horses, water. That was exactly what Vane expected. He wants us divided, Cole said. The council fell quiet. He will send fire toward the homes, riders toward the herd, and 2 or 3 men to hold the spring. We cannot answer all 3. Mara looked at him. So we abandon something? No. We make him attack the wrong canyon. Cole's plan depended on the horses. White Flint's herd had been trained to move by lead mare, whistle, and bell. Cole proposed taking the best animals through a hidden southern cut before the attack, leaving only 12 geldings in the visible corral. The rest would be decoys, blankets over brush frames, dust kicked up at the right time. Hoof sounds created by a small group running the canyon floor behind the ridge. Vane would see what Greed expected to see, a herd waiting to be taken. Meanwhile, the village would empty into old cliff shelters above the spring. Warriors would hold narrow positions instead of the open basin, and Cole would ride to the rail town of San Rosario, not for the sheriff, for proof. If Vane sells to contractors, Cole said, someone keeps lists, brands, numbers, delivery dates. A stolen horse becomes money only when paper says it belongs to somebody else. Mara studied him. You believe paper will save us? No, but it may make men with rifles interested in stopping him. I am coming. This time, no. Her eyes hardened. Cole continued before she could cut him apart. Vane knows you. He has seen White Flint riders. San Rosario has 2 streets and too many windows. I can pass as a drifting horse buyer. You cannot pass as someone they are not watching for. Mara stepped close enough that he could see the scar through her eyebrow. You do not decide where I can go. No. But I decide whether I can work while worrying every drunk in town has recognized my partner. The word partner stopped her, only for a moment. Then she said, 2 days. If you are not back by the second sunset, I come after you. Fair, not fair, final. San Rosario smelled of coal smoke, sweat, and spilled beer. Cole arrived before noon and spent 6 hours pretending to have money. He asked about remounts. He admired horses he would never buy. He complained loudly about army prices until a stable owner decided he was harmless. By evening, Cole had the name of Vane's buyer, Gideon Pruitt, freight agent. By midnight, he had seen Pruitt meet a man wearing Vane's black crow pin behind the rail depot. Cole followed them to an office beside the stock pens. Through a cracked window, he heard numbers: 40 horses, delivery after the 5th day, payment on arrival. And one final instruction: no survivors in the canyon. The land claim must look abandoned. Cole waited until both men left. Then he entered the office through the roof vent. Inside, he found a ledger listing stolen brands from 4 ranches and 2 settlements. White Flint's 3 mares were already recorded under false marks. Beside the list was a freight contract promising Vane more money for the canyon's water access than for every horse combined. That was the mechanism. The horses were bait. The spring was the prize. Cole tore out the pages he needed. A floorboard creaked behind him. Pruitt stood in the doorway with a revolver. "You are a long way from the trail, Cowboy." Cole slowly raised his hands. "I got lost." "So I heard." Pruitt smiled. Silas said a wet stray had wandered into White Flint. He wondered how long before they sent you to town. Cole's stomach dropped. Vane knew about him. Pruitt stepped closer. "Give me the pages." Cole looked toward the window. 2 stories down, stock pens below, no clean escape. Then the horses began screaming outside. Every animal in the freight pen surged toward the east gate. A gray mare flashed beneath the lanterns. Rain. Mara had come after him a day early. Pruitt turned his head. Cole hit him with the ledger. The revolver fired into the ceiling. Cole went through the window, caught the sloped awning, and dropped into the stock pen. Mara rode straight through the open gate with 3 saddled horses behind her. "I said 2 sunsets." Cole shouted as he grabbed a pommel. "This is the 2nd night. It is not sunset anymore." "Then stop talking." They rode out under gunfire. 1 bullet tore Cole's sleeve. Another struck the ledger pages tucked inside his coat but did not pass through the folded paper. By dawn, they were back in the desert. Mara saw the blood on his arm and made him stop. "It grazed me." "You say that as if blood knows the difference." She cleaned the wound with water from her canteen. Cole watched her hands. Steady hands, angry hands. Hands that had cut ropes, handled reins, and carried half the fear of her people without ever naming it. "You came because you thought I was in trouble," he said. "I came because you are useful." "Of course." "And because," she tied the bandage tighter than necessary, "because I did not want the vow to choose a dead man." Cole looked at her. For the first time, neither of them turned away. Then a column of smoke rose in the southern sky. White Flint. They rode hard. They reached the canyon rim near dusk. The village below was burning, not all of it. 3 empty shelters on the north edge, fired early by Vane's scouts. The attack had started a day ahead of schedule. Gunshots cracked from the rocks. The decoy corral had fooled the first riders, but Vane had brought 23 men, not 18. He had also found the southern cut. The real herd was trapped between his riders and a wall of stone. Mara saw Rain's ears turn toward the distant bell. Her face went white. "My people are in the cliff shelters. The horses are south." Cole pulled the stolen ledger pages from his coat. Proof no longer mattered if no one lived to use it. This was the choice the vow had actually been built to expose. Not who a stranger married, what he protected when he could not protect everything. Haskell appeared behind a rock barricade. "Tolan says Vane has men above the spring. They are carrying oil." Cole looked from the smoke to the southern ridge. People, horses, water, 3 targets again, but now he understood the canyon. The spring fed an old stone channel beneath the basin. During flash storms, wooden gates diverted water toward the lower wash to keep the homes from flooding. Cole had seen the gate beams when he first entered. "What happens if you open every floodgate at once?" he asked. Haskell stared at him. "The lower wash fills." "How fast?" "With the spring reservoir full, fast enough." Mara understood. "Vane's main riders are in the wash." Cole nodded. "But someone has to reach the upper gate. His men are between here and there." "I will go," Mara said. "So will I." Haskell grabbed Cole's shoulder. "The horses Rain can bring them." Mara lifted the small brass bell from her saddle. White Flint's herd followed the gray mare. If Tolan rode Rain along the high shelf and rang the bell, the trapped horses would climb toward her through a narrow goat path Vane's men had missed. That left Cole and Mara to cross the burning village, reach the reservoir gate, and turn the canyon itself against the gang. They moved through smoke. Cole fired only when he had a clear target. Mara did not waste a shot. They reached the spring as 2 of Vane's men poured oil along the cottonwood roots. Mara dropped one man's rifle from his hands. Cole tackled the other into the water. For one strange second he was back where the story began. soaked, breathless, surrounded by danger. Then Silas Vane stepped from behind the rocks. He was taller than Cole expected, dressed in a black trail coat with a silver crow pinned to the collar. He held Haskay's youngest grandson in front of him and a revolver against the boy's neck. "Open ground," Vane said. "Drop the weapons." Mara lowered her rifle first. Cole followed. Vane smiled at the spring. "All this trouble for a hole in the rock." "It is not yours," Mara said. "It belongs to whoever can hold it." He ordered one man to bind them. Above the canyon, faint through smoke, a bell began to ring. Vane glanced toward the sound. The real herd appeared on the high shelf, climbing behind Rain in a long silver line. For 1 second, greed replaced caution on every outlaw face. That second was enough. The boy bit Vane's hand. Mara drove her shoulder into the gunman beside her. Cole seized the loose gate rope and cut it with the ceremonial blade Haskay had given him that morning for luck. The upper beam dropped. Deep beneath the rock, water struck wood. Then the old channel roared awake. A wall of muddy water burst into the lower wash. Not high enough to drown men, high enough to knock horses sideways, extinguish fire lines, soak powder, and turn the canyon floor into moving clay. Vane's riders lost formation. White Flint's warriors came down from the rocks in 3 groups, closing every dry exit. The fight ended in minutes. Some outlaws fled on foot. Most surrendered when their rifles would not fire. Vane ran for the spring trail. Cole followed. They met above the same pool where 12 arrows had once pointed at Cole's chest. Vane drew a knife. Cole had no weapon left. The outlaw lunged. Cole stepped aside, caught Vane's wrist, and used the man's momentum the way he would turn a panicked horse away from wire. Vane hit the ground hard. Mara arrived with her rifle leveled. Vane froze. Below them, the gray mare's bell kept ringing as the herd entered the basin. By midnight, the fires were out. At sunrise, a territorial deputy arrived with 6 armed ranchers whose stolen brands were listed in Pruitt's ledger. Cole's pages had been damaged by the bullet, but the names and numbers remained readable. Gideon Pruitt was arrested in San Rosario. The freight contract exposed the land scheme. Vane's gang did not disappear into rumor. This time there was paper, witnesses, stolen horses, and men willing to testify. White Flint had lost 3 shelters and part of a corral. No one had died. The spring still ran clear. For the next 2 days, Cole repaired fences and avoided the question waiting beneath every conversation. On the 7th morning, the council gathered again. Yana placed a clay bowl of spring water between Cole and Mara. "The old vow has been repeated badly for many years," she said. Cole looked at Haskay. The chief almost smiled. Yana continued, "It never promised our daughter to the first stranger who entered the water. It required us to test him. Water reveals appetite. A thirsty man may take, leave, or share. The one brought before the council must be given a choice after danger passes." Mara looked at her father. "You could have explained that on the first day." "You would not have listened on the first day. I am not listening now." The council laughed. Yana turned to Cole. "You may leave with food, a horse, and the gratitude of White Flint. No debt follows you." Then she turned to Mara. "You may ask him to stay. No vow commands you." The canyon became very quiet. Cole had spent years believing freedom meant no one could claim him. No ranch, no family debt, no promise. But standing beside that spring, he understood there was another kind of freedom. The freedom to choose what would have been easier to abandon. Mara lifted the clay bowl and drank. Then she held it out to him. "I am not asking for a husband today," she said. "I am asking for a partner who knows horses, notices bad trails, and occasionally follows instructions." Cole took the bowl. "That last part may be difficult. I know. And Silver City? They will find another horsebreaker." Cole drank from the spring, the same cold water. A different man. He stayed through the winter. In spring, he and Mara built a new corral above the floodline. By summer, they were running horses to honest buyers under White Flint brands that could not be quietly erased. A year after the attack, they stood before the council again. This time, no arrows, no surprise, no one speaking for either of them. Mara chose Cole. Cole chose Mara. And the people of White Flint called it the Water Vow, not because a river had decided their future, but because one desperate drink had finally shown Cole what he was willing to stay thirsty for.